Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the fact that you all got a break, and want to thank you all so very much for your work, because each of your agencies is so critically important. And I want to start out because in the CARA effort, the first section of that bill was a section that my colleague from Massachusetts, Representative Kennedy, and I worked on, and it was to establish that interagency and medical professional task force to review and, when necessary, and update and modify the CDC best practices guidelines for pain management. And so, Dr. Schuckett, can you tell me, did you know about this formation, and that needs to be formed by the end of December of 18, and a report, and you're looking at Dr. McCants cat. So I'm curious, I just want to know, is it happening? Is it in formation? And will we get a report without great detail? I just want to know that we've had a change in administration, so I want to know that it's on people's radars.
Yes, it is. And so we have members of the public that the application process closed. They're in the process of being selected now, and that committee is definitely going to be in place, and you will get the report. Okay,
outstanding. Thank you. Dr. Gottlieb, in building on what Representative Carter talked about with respect to prescriber education, you talked about we're at a point where we, in your opening remarks, you said where we might be doing some hard things we're not really comfortable with, and you talked about prescriber education, and that we have a generation of prescribers that need more education. Can you, and I'm interested in the entire panel's very quick answer, because I have so many things I would like to ask all of you, do you believe that mandatory prescriber education for either renewal or for the first DEA licensure of someone who gets a DEA license, or for renewal, that we should come up with some mandatory prescriber education?
Congresswoman, I would certainly support that goal, and I've said as much. I will just, the one caveat I would add is I don't think it needs to be a 3-day course. I think it's more efficient if it's a short course and we hit doctors with some key principles. I think there's ways to do that.
Okay, where does a 3-day course come in?
I just threw it out there because there's some
right.
states that have these long courses.
Okay.
But I think something short and targeted and focused would be the most effective way to try to operationalize.
Do you agree with that, Dr. McCants-Katz?
I agree with it in general. I think that any prescriber who wants to prescribe controlled substances needs to have that education.
Needs to have that
Absolutely.
Education. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Doherty, you may not know, but I'm a former U.S. attorney, and I did an OxyContin case against a physician that distributed to a community in southern Indiana, and where people died, OxyContin mill that was happening. So this type of challenge has been with us for a long time. But when I met with IMPD last week, our Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, they said they took off a 55-gallon drum of pills in our community, full of pills, laced with fentanyl. And can you tell me, do you need any additional authorities that would help DEA improve its enforcement actions that have to do with pill presses?
Ma'am, DEA has been very active in leaning forward on issues with respect to pill presses. We have formalized a rule that requires the import-export of pill presses to be electronically sent to DEA. We work very closely with CBP. That said, we would certainly welcome a dialogue with Congress and with the Department of Justice to look at...
Sorry, do you need more teeth? Do you need anything? And if you would please give some thought to that, whether or not legislation needs to happen, because as I understand, some of these pills that are coming in, our police department believes that the traffickers don't even know what's in them. They don't even know that they are dealing fentanyl necessarily. Is that something that you have seen?
Yes, ma'am. We have seen the fact that certainly the end user doesn't know what they're getting, and some individuals in the supply chain are also unwitting to a certain extent in terms of what they're trafficking. So I would be happy to take that back, ma'am, and have a dialogue on that and re-engage with Congress and the department.
And then finally, Dr. McCants-Katz, in context of the opioid crisis, do you believe it's important that a patient's provider, their primary care or their main doctor, has access to his or her substance use disorder records? Because I understand there is not a connection between the behavioral specialists, and I'm seeing nodding here from Dr. Valco and Dr. Shawkat. And so why is that a problem, and how do we fix that? That a primary care provider or another physician cannot have access to the mental health provider record?
So there are several laws in place that prevent certain types of communications, and the 42 CFR prevents organizations or treatment providers, if you will, that hold themselves out as substance abuse treatment providers from sharing records without specific permission from the patient. I will tell you that this is something that the Trump administration has been looking at since before I got here. We will be coming out in a couple of months with some revisions to communication that could be allowed under 42 CFR to better serve communication with physicians who are not substance abuse treatment providers but may be treating a patient with a substance use disorder. Why is this important? Because very often somebody's got a co-occurring illness which will require them to be on a medication that could have a significant drug-drug interaction that could place a person's life at risk, even on standard doses of medication. So it becomes a very important issue clinically.
Thank you. And if I could just close with, and I know I am over time, but I think what hopefully you have seen is that if there is legislation that anyone on either side of the aisle of this hearing, we want to either resolve issues that occur either in statute or in regulation, and please make sure we know what those are. Thank you. I yield back.
Sure. Thanks, the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back.